Göbekli Tepe was supposed to be the beginning. 12,000 years old, the oldest evidence of organized human civilization ever found. Every textbook says so. Every documentary repeats it. Then, in January 2026, a team of scientists published a study in Nature that made that entire timeline irrelevant. On a small island off the coast of Indonesia, hidden inside a limestone cave, they found a single human handprint. It was dated to 67,800 years ago, 56,000 years before the first stone was placed at Göbekli Tepe. And the fingers were not human. We are going to walk through this discovery from the beginning. How it was found, how it was dated, what the fingers actually show, and why a single handprint on a cave wall may be the most important archaeological find of the decade. We will also connect it to a second discovery from the same island chain, one that we briefly touched on in our recent video on 7 ancient discoveries that defy all explanation. That second find, a 51,200-year-old painting of humans hunting a wild pig, was already the oldest known narrative scene in the world. This new handprint is 16,000 years older than that. By the end of this video, the timeline you thought you knew will look very different. The cave on Muna Island. Muna Island sits off the southeastern coast of Sulawesi in Indonesia's Coral Triangle. It is a small, forested limestone island, roughly 80 kilometers across, surrounded by some of the most biodiverse waters on Earth. The interior is riddled with caves and overhangs formed by millions of years of tropical erosion, cutting through porous rock. Most of these caves have never been formally surveyed by archaeologists. Local communities have known about the paintings inside them for generations. Western science arrived late. One of those caves is called Liang Metanduno. It is not a famous site. It does not appear in tourist guides or archaeological textbooks. The entrance opens into a modest chamber with a low ceiling and walls darkened by centuries of soot and moisture. For most of its existence, the paintings inside were assumed to be a few thousand years old at most. Like many of the hand stencils and animal figures found across the broader Maros Pangkep and Muna Karst regions, that assumption was wrong by more than 60,000 years. The research team, led by Adhi Agus Octaviana from Indonesia's National Research and Innovation Agency, known by its Indonesian acronym BRIN, had been systematically surveying caves across Sulawesi and its surrounding islands for a decade-long period. This was not a one-time expedition. It was a sustained, multi-year campaign to document and date the cave art of an entire island chain. Alongside Octaviana were Renaud Joans Boyot from Southern Cross University in Australia, and Adam Brum and Maxime Aubert from Griffith University. Together, they had already upended the field once before, with the 51,200-year-old narrative painting at Leang Karampuang in July 2024. But Liang Metanduno was about to push the record back even further. Inside the cave, beneath a layer of younger paintings estimated at roughly 4,000 years old, the team identified 7 hand stencils made with a technique called spray painting. The artist placed their hand flat against the limestone wall, then blew pigment around it through a hollow bone or reed, leaving a negative outline on the rock. This method has been documented in caves around the world, from the Gargas Cave in France to the Cueva de las Manos in Argentina. But the stencils at Liang Metanduno were different. They were hidden, buried under millennia of newer art, like a palimpsest, waiting for someone with the right technology to see through the layers. And the dating proved it. The laser that changed everything. Traditional methods for dating cave art relied on radiocarbon analysis of organic pigments. But most ancient cave paintings used mineral pigments, iron oxides, that contain no carbon. For decades, this meant the oldest paintings simply could not be dated. Then came uranium series dating. When water trickles over a cave wall, it deposits thin layers of calcium carbonate, calcite, on top of the artwork. That calcite contains trace amounts of uranium, which decays into thorium at a known rate. By measuring the uranium to thorium ratio, scientists can determine when the calcite layer formed. If the calcite sits on top of the painting must be at least as old as the calcite. The problem was precision. Older methods required scraping off chunks of calcite and dissolving them in acid. This destroyed material and mixed younger and older layers together, producing imprecise dates. The breakthrough came from the same team working in Sulawesi. They developed a technique called laser ablation uranium series imaging, or LAU series. Instead of scraping, a focused laser beam vaporizes a spot of calcite less than 50 microns across, roughly the width of a human hair. A mass spectrometer then reads the uranium and thorium content from that microscopic point. By scanning across the calcite layer, the team builds a high-resolution map of ages at different depths, getting as close to the original pigment as physically possible. This is the technique that produced the 51,200-year date at Liang Karampuang. And this is the technique they brought to Liang Metanduno. The key sample, designated LMET2, returned a date of 71,600 years, plus or minus 3,800. That means the calcite layer formed no later than 67,800 years ago. The painting underneath is at least that old. A second stencil, LMET1, located just 11 centimeters away on the same wall, dated to approximately 60,900 years. The results were published in Nature on January 21, 2026. Volume 650, pages 652 to 656. Over 40 co-authors. Within weeks, the paper had been accessed more than 89,000 times. The fingers that were not fingers. The hand stencil at Liang Metanduno is not a simple outline. Look closely at the fingertips. They narrow to points, not blunt, rounded human fingers. Tapered, claw-like shapes, as if the hand had been deliberately altered before the pigment was sprayed. This was not an accident or a flaw in preservation. The rest of the hand is anatomically normal. Only the fingertips change, and the change is consistent across multiple digits. The most likely explanation is that the artist deliberately manipulated their fingers, bending or covering the tips, to create the appearance of claws or talons. This is symbolic transformation. The artist was turning their own body into something else, human into animal, self into other. And this theme does not appear just once. 16,000 years after the Liang Metanduno stencil was made, at Liang Karampuang, roughly 200 kilometers to the north, the same research team documented a painting showing a wild pig surrounded by 3 human-like figures. One of those figures appears to be a therianthrope, a being that is part human and part animal, a half-human, half-bird creature. The painting, dated to 51,200 years ago, was already the oldest known narrative art in the world. But the Liang Metanduno stencil suggests this tradition of identity transformation through art goes back even further. A continuous artistic culture spanning at least 35,000 years in one region, on one island chain. No comparable tradition has been documented anywhere else on Earth. Who made this mark? The conventional answer is Homo sapien. Modern humans were in Southeast Asia by at least 65,000 years ago, possibly earlier, on their migration toward Australia. Sulawesi sits directly on that route, a stepping stone between the Asian mainland and the island Hands leading toward Sahul, the ancient landmass that connected Australia and New Guinea during periods of lower sea level. The ocean crossings required to reach Sulawesi from mainland Asia were substantial, at least 60 to 100 kilometers of open water depending on sea levels at the time. Whoever made these crossings was not stumbling blindly. They were navigating, building watercraft, reading currents and stars, and apparently, once they arrived, they were painting. The timing aligns almost perfectly. The oldest confirmed evidence of humans in Australia dates to roughly 65,000 years ago, from the Madjed Baby rock shelter in the Northern Territory. The Liang Metanduno stencil dates to at least 67,800 years ago. If these dates hold, the handprint may document one of the most extraordinary moments in human history. Not the destination, but the journey. A waypoint left behind by people in the middle of the longest ocean migration our species has ever undertaken. But there is another possibility that the research community is now being forced to consider, and it is one that most documentaries will not touch. Paul Pettit, a professor of Paleolithic archaeology at Durham University, published a commentary alongside the Nature paper. His words were measured but pointed. He cautioned against assuming that Homo sapiens were the only species capable of symbolic behavior in this region at this time. Before writing grand narratives about the complexity and success of our species, he suggested, we should consider other, potentially more interesting explanations. He was talking about Denisovans. The enigmatic human relatives were first identified not from bones or tools, but from DNA extracted from a single finger bone in a Siberian cave. Denisovans are now confirmed to have lived across a vast range of Southeast Asia and Oceania. Their genetic traces survive today in modern populations across Melanesia, Australia, the Philippines, and parts of mainland Southeast Asia. In some populations, Denisovan DNA accounts for up to 5% of the genome. No Denisovan cave art has ever been identified, but then no one had the dating technology to check until a few years ago. The laser ablation uranium series method that dated the Liang Metanduno stencil has only been in use since 2024. Hundreds of caves in the Denisovan range remain unexamined. The question is no longer whether non-sapien species made art. The question is whether we have been assuming the answer for too long without testing it. We covered the broader Taz Tepeler network around Göbekli Tepe in a previous video, showing how 12 connected sites proved that Göbekli Tepe was not a singular miracle, but part of a civilization-scale system. Sulawesi is doing something similar to the timeline of symbolic thought. It is proving that what we called the beginning was actually a late chapter in a story that started tens of thousands of years earlier. Why Sulawesi keeps rewriting history. There is something specific about Sulawesi that makes it a preservation laboratory for ancient art. The limestone karst towers that dominate the landscape are rich in calcium carbonate. Water seeping through the rock deposits, calcite layers over paintings far more reliably than in most other cave environments. This is what makes laser ablation uranium series dating possible. Without the calcite, there is nothing to date. For decades, Europe held the record. The Chauvet cave paintings in southeastern France, documented by Werner Herzog in his film Cave of Forgotten Dreams, were dated to roughly 36,000 years ago. They were considered the pinnacle of prehistoric art, the proof that symbolic sophistication began in Ice Age Europe and spread outward from there. That narrative shaped an entire generation of archaeology. Sulawesi demolished that story. The oldest art is not in France. It is not in Spain. It is on a tropical island in Southeast Asia, made by people who crossed oceans to get there. The dates from Liang Metanduno push the record back to nearly twice the age of Chauvet. And the Leang Karampuang narrative scene, at 51,200 years, is older than every piece of figurative art ever found in Europe. The implication is uncomfortable. Sulawesi is not necessarily where the oldest art was made. It is where the oldest art survived long enough to be measured. Cave paintings in tropical environments without calcite formation across Africa, mainland Southeast Asia, and India would have degraded beyond recognition tens of thousands of years ago. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. If anything, the Sulawesi finds suggest that the real origins of symbolic behavior lie even deeper in the past, in places where the chemistry of preservation simply did not cooperate. Maxime Aubert has said publicly that, based on the trajectory of discoveries in Sulawesi, he would not be surprised if art dating to 100,000 years or more is eventually found in the region. The laser ablation uranium series technique is still new. Hundreds of caves across the island chain remain unsurveyed. The 67,800-year date may not hold the record for long. What this means for the timeline: Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. It remains the oldest known monumental stone architecture. Nobody is disputing that. But the argument that Göbekli Tepe represents the dawn of symbolic civilization is now finished. Symbolic behavior, the ability to represent ideas through images, to transform identity through art, to create meaning beyond the practical, is confirmed at 67,800 years. That is not a minor revision. It is a complete reframing of when and where the human mind became capable of what we call culture. Not everyone agrees. The uranium series dating method, even in its advanced LAU series form, has drawn scrutiny. In 2020, a team led by Georges Sauvé raised concerns about potential uranium leaching in calcite, arguing that it could produce dates that are too old. The Sulawesi team is aware of these objections. The LAU series technique was developed in part to address exactly those concerns, by measuring uranium and thorium at sub-50 micron resolution rather than dissolving entire samples. No published critique has specifically challenged the 2024 or 2026 Sulawesi dates on methodological grounds. But the debate is ongoing, and in science it should be. What is harder to dismiss is the pattern. This is not a single date from a single cave. The Sulawesi research program has now produced a sequence of dates from multiple caves across the island chain. 67,800 years at Liang Metanduno, 51,200 years at Leang Karampuang, 45,500 years at Leang Tedonga, 43,900 years at Leang Bulu Sipong. Each date comes from a different cave, a different calcite sample, and a different artwork. Together, they form a timeline that stretches across 24,000 years of continuous artistic activity, all within a radius of 300 kilometers. And the 35,000 years of continuous artistic tradition in Sulawesi raises an even larger question. If a single island chain maintained a recognizable symbolic tradition for 350 centuries, what does that tell us about the societies that sustained it? These were not scattered bands of wanderers leaving random marks on walls. This was cultural transmission across hundreds of generations. Teaching, learning, remembering. Passing down not just survival skills but meaning. The standard model of human development places the birth of culture somewhere after the last ice age. Agriculture came first, then permanent settlements, then organized religion, then art, then writing. Göbekli Tepe already damaged that model by proving that monumental building came before agriculture. Sulawesi damages it further by proving that symbolic art came 56,000 years before monumental building. The question is no longer when civilization began. The question is how many times it began, in how many places, and how much of it we have already lost to time and chemistry and tropical rain. Göbekli Tepe is extraordinary, but it is not the beginning of the story. It is one chapter in a story that started 56,000 years earlier, on a limestone wall, on a small island, in the hands of someone who decided to turn their fingers into claws. We do not know their name. We do not know their language. We do not know if they crossed the ocean the next day or spent a lifetime in that cave. All we know is that 67,800 years ago, someone stood in the dark, placed their hand against cold stone, blew pigment through a hollow bone, and left a mark that outlasted every empire, every religion, and every written language that would come after it. The study was published in Nature on January 21st, 2026. The cave is still there. The hand is still on the wall, and most of the caves on Sulawesi have never been surveyed. If you want to see what else archaeology has been getting wrong, our video on 7 ancient discoveries that defy all explanation covers 6 more stories just like this one. The link is on screen now. We cover discoveries like this every week. Like and subscribe.